In today's world, I'll cripple you. I will cripple you.
On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, will the ILA strike on October 1st? I am your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode, and you just heard Harold Daggett, the president of the International Longshoremen Association, in what is entitled A Candid Conversation. I cannot imagine an uncandid conversation with Harold Daggett, but that's the candid one, where President Daggett talked about whether or not his men will go, and women, will go on strike on October 1st. And if I'm a betting person, I think that's a person who is committed to either getting what he wants, or we can expect to see ports along the east and Gulf Coast of the United States shut down on October 1st. What does that mean going forward, and what are the chances of that? We're going to talk about it in today's episode. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out.
And pay taxes. They want to get rid of him. Where's the president of the United States? He's not fighting for us. He told in LA, he told the union, hurry up and get a contract. That's the mentality they have. They don't even know what the hell they're doing today. Well, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to save everybody's job when it comes to the ILA and to all the unions around the world, because we're going to fight it with that alliance. I'll shut them down throughout the world to prove that we can beat them.
A little more of that candid conversation there by Harold Daggett, the president of the ILA. Container shipping lines fear port strike will paralyze half of U.S. trade. This is a Bloomberg story over in G-Captain. If you start looking at the stats, it is pretty mind-boggling. This is from Mediterranean Shipping Company, who put out a customer alert. They're saying that this may not be resolved by September 30th deadline. That would delay the shipment of containers, both imports and exports, on trucks and railroads through ports from Boston to Houston. Goes on here in the advisory, booking adjustments include rolls to other vessels, or cancellations may be needed. The Geneva-based company said it will continue to accept requests for dry cargo services while reserving the right to not accept new refrigerated bookings. I think this is the stat that stands out the most for me. Oxford Economics estimate that a strike would cost the U.S. economy $4.5 billion to $7.5 billion a week, a hit to gross domestic product that would be reversed after it's over and shipments resume. Then you have this story by Mike Schuller. ILA fires back at the U.S. Maritime Alliance unfair labor practice publicity stunt. The ILA strongly rebuked the USMX for filing an unfair labor practice charge against him, calling it a weak publicity campaign and a publicity stunt. Goes on here, the USMX filed the charge with the National Labor Relations Board on Thursday over the repeated refusal to come to the table and bargain. In response, the ILA accused the U.S. Maritime Alliance of attempting to mislead the public about their concern for longshoremen workers and their commitments to negotiations. The ILA spokesman said USMX filed these charges 4 days before the expiration of the current master contract, clearly illustrates what poor negotiating partners they have been. So let's take a step back and take a look at this. So both these organizations, the U.S. Maritime Alliance, which represents the ports, the terminals, the shipping companies on the East and Gulf Coast, and the International Longshoremen Association, these are the 45,000 workers in ports from Boston to Houston, have a contract that's up for renewal. Now, this contract has been in place for 6 years. It's since 2018. And the 6-year contracts were put in place to prevent these from kind of issues from arising. However, in the period that has transpired from 2018 to the period of 2024, what we saw was the ocean carriers, which make up the majority of the U.S. Maritime Alliance. On the board of directors, for example, 8 of the 15 seats are held by foreign shipping companies, including the Chinese Overseas Shipping Company. Those companies made record profits during the height of the supply chain crisis from 2020 to 2023, talking about billions. Daggett and the ILA want to see a substantial pay raise. The argument has been for about a 32% pay raise. Daggett and the ILA are pushing for a 70% pay raise over the span of the contract. And understand, you're going to hear a lot of figures floating out for ILA personnel. Oh, they make six figures, 200,000. There are different levels of ILA employees. Whatever they make, a good chunk of it, like everyone's pay, goes to taxes, but another chunk of that goes to dues for the ILA to pay for their retirees. And that's a big issue with the ILA right now. The issue that was talked about in the video by Daggett is two things. Number one, it's wages. And number two, it's automation, automating the ports. I want to take you over to a document that really shows what is happening here. The potential impact of an international longshoreman strike. I'll have this available for you to take a look at in full detail. You can break it apart, but I want to highlight just a couple of issues that they make here. This is a look at the imports and exports in terms of value on the East and Gulf Coast of the U.S. At the bottom, you see the value in billions of dollars, and then the colors, the percentage, is how much of that comes in through the East Coast. So, for example, in terms of imports, if you look at the top ones, we're looking at pig iron, alloy steel, natural rubber, iron ore, tin, cocoa beans, ferrous products, and a whole batch of chemicals coming in. But overwhelmingly, you're talking about over 90% of those are coming in. If you look at the exports going out, fuels, mineral oil, machinery, mechanical, electrical machinery, vehicles, aircraft, opticals, photographic, pharmaceuticals, plastics. All of these are large percentages going out, except for aircraft, which is about 18%, optical 16%. But a lot of this is coming out of the East Coast, Gulf Coast ports. This is what we're going to see. Notice what you don't see here are things like food and other commodities, even though you're going to hear about bananas and a lot of other commodities. So one of the big fears that this is going to do is force shipments to come into the United States via other methods, either by Europe routing through the Panama Canal and coming to the West Coast, or potentially coming into Canadian and Mexican ports and coming in on rail. Now, not every port has an ILA presence along the East and Gulf Coast, but it's going to be very difficult to get ships in and out of ports in the U.S. East Coast unless they can make it to all the required ports. This chart gives you the top 10 ports as determined by ILA presence with the total imports and exports. So, for example, when you're looking at New York, New Jersey, you're looking at imports of somewhere in the range of $232 billion, and that's 7.5% of U.S. value of petroleum. In terms of exports, it's vehicles. In Houston, it's petroleum. In New Orleans, it's returned exports and aircraft. Savannah, vehicle parts and vehicles. And you can just see there the amount of goods that are coming in and out of U.S. ports. And to give you a snapshot of just a single port, this is the top 15 impacted sectors in the Hampton Roads, Virginia ports. They spelled Hampton wrong. I did notice that in this. But you're looking at output in millions, machinery, primary metals, chemicals, manufacturing, electrical material, real estate being largely goods for building homes, wholesale trade, plastics, rubber, you name it. This is a absolute plethora of material coming out. And what Daggett is really focusing on here is that he is willing to walk out with the ILA. I want to go back to Harold Daggett and talk about one last statement he gives. That statement I gave you in the beginning was the end of it, but I want to give you his full statement here.
But today's world, it's changing into the future. They're not making millions no more. They're making billions, and they're spending it fast as they make it. I want a piece of that for my men, because when they made their most money was during COVID. When my men had to go to work on those piers every single day, when everybody stayed home and went to work. Not my men. They died out there with the virus. We all got sick with the virus. We kept them going. From Canada to Maine to Texas, Great Lakes, Puerto Rico, now the Bahamas, everybody went to work during COVID. Nobody stayed home. Well, I want to be compensated for that. I'm not asking for the world. They know what I want. They know what I want. And if they don't, well, then I have to go into the street and we have to fight for what we rightfully deserve. These people today don't know what a strike is.
Right.
When my men hit the streets, from Maine to Texas, every single port will lock down. You know what's gonna happen? I'll tell you. First week, be all over the news every night, boom, boom. Second week, Guys who sell cars can't sell cars because the cars ain't coming in off the ships. They get laid off. Third week, malls start closing down. They can't get the goods from China. They can't sell clothes. They can't do this. Everything in the United States comes on a ship. They go out of business. Construction workers get laid off because the materials aren't coming in. The steel's not coming in. The lumber's not coming in. They lose their job. Everybody's hating the longshoremen now because now they realize how important our jobs are. Now I have the president screaming at me, I'm putting a Taft-Hartley on you. Go ahead. Taft-Hartley means I have to go back to work for 90 days. That's a cooling off period. Do you think when I go back for 90 days, those men are going to go to work on that pier? It's going to cost the company's money to pay their salaries. Well, they went from 30 moves an hour maybe to 8. They're going to be like this. Who's going to win here in the long run? You're better off sitting down and let's get a contract and let's move on with this world. And in today's world, I'll cripple you. I will cripple you, and you have no idea what that means. Nobody does.
Okay. I think he's serious. I don't know about everybody else, but that gives me the impression of someone who's serious about going on strike. Now, I want to flip it for just a second here. ILA is not at the table with the U.S. Maritime Alliance. I would get more credence to the ILA here if they were sitting down negotiating, but they're not. They walked away from the table because, let's be clear, they don't feel like the U.S. Maritime Alliance is giving them what they want. Both sides need to sit down. There needs to be a sit down. They need to be at the table together. However, I think it's Friday afternoon now. This strike hits Monday evening into Tuesday morning on October 1st. I think even if they sit down, they're not going to be able to hammer out a deal here. And I don't think that Daggett and the ILA are going to do a deal like they did on the West Coast with the ILW and the PMA, where they continue working past the deadline without a contract. I would almost bet you that they watched and studied what happened on the West Coast and other union negotiations, the UAW, what had happened with the Teamsters, and they are going to exercise this. Think about this for a minute. They are at the best inflection point in terms of labor to do this strike. You have a lame duck president who is leaving office, who's a friend of labor. Joe Biden was on a picket line, with them, even though he's kind of harsh on Joe Biden here. You have two potential presidents coming in, Harris on the Democrat, Trump on the Republican side. Trump is talking about increased tariffs, which would shut down or slow down imports into U.S. ports. Harris doesn't want to be saddled with this coming in. So this is the most leverage the ILA has right now. And they're fighting against foreign shipping companies that have made billions of dollars off the global supply chain crisis, and they're making money right now being routed around Africa because of the crisis from the Houthi. This has the potential to impact everything. You're going to have car carriers impacted. Containers are going to be impacted. Depending on the ports, if ILAs are line handlers, you may have some tankers and grain carriers impacted. This is going to be strategic. 50% of container imports come in through the East and Gulf Coast of the United States. If all of a sudden this shuts down, what's going to happen is if it's a day, no immediate impact. You're not going to see shortages or anything, but it will take about a week to straighten everything out if it's a day strike. If it's a week strike, you're talking about going into November, potentially December. If it's more than 2 weeks, it's the new year coming in. And let's be clear, you're not going to see shortages. All of a sudden, things aren't going to disappear off the shelves because there's not coming in the ports. They are going to disappear off the shelves because people are going to panic. I guarantee you that. There will be panic, and people will start buying anything. When we saw the initial Houthi stopping of vessels, we saw a massive spike all of a sudden in freight rates. Well, then the initial shock wore off, and then we saw the gradual climb here because of the shock it had to the system. But eventually, you reached a period where you get equilibrium. But what we're seeing right now is that's going to happen here. We're going to have a massive spike in issues. We could see costs go up, inflation go up for goods that are all of a sudden in short supply. Manufacturing is going to be a problem because manufacturing relies on just-in-time logistics. So we're going to see some plants shutting down or manufacturing stop. out, including Department of Defense and military equipment. And then what we'll see is things will start to placate a little bit. Goods will be coming in from the West Coast, other sources, but they won't be able to meet the demand, and we'll see it rise again. Daggett and the ILA are in a good position to strike. I think both sides, there needs to be government intervention here. I'm not a big government intervention guy. I'm not talking about making them go to work, not Taft-Hartley, but get these parties at the table negotiating and hammer out a deal. They need a deal. They need a deal on pay. They need a deal on automation. Daggett and the ILA cannot sit there and resist automation forever. There has to be a gradual automation kicked in here, and there needs to be a plan to safeguard the members of the ILA and the retired members of the ILA so that they don't get screwed out of work. That's the key right there. Daggett's never going to say he's going to accept automation. He's never going to say that. But there has to be an agreement toward that, and it needs to happen soon. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You can hit the super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and be a monthly or yearly subscriber. Until the next episode, Sal, signing off.